All right. It looks like people are starting to trickle in. And so I'm going to go ahead and, as everyone is rolling in, get started for us today because I want to appreciate all of your time and the time of our amazing guest, Nancy. And so let's just dive into it. Thank you to everyone joining us today from across the country and the world. I'm Alexander McCoben, the CEO here at Conscious Capitalism, Inc. I just want to say how much I appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Today, we're joined by Nancy Pautsch to explore how conscious capitalism is taking place at her company, ENVISION IT. And before I get to Nancy, though, I want to talk about conscious capitalism more broadly. Because as many of you know, conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization dedicated to catalyzing that movement. Every week, we're offering virtual gatherings as a way for the community to see how this philosophy takes shape in the leadership journeys and the business practices of those in our network. And today's gathering is going to run for about 45 minutes. Nancy and I are going to be in conversation in the beginning for about 10 to 15 minutes and then transition to you during the last half of our session. If you have any questions during this, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please email us at info@consciouscapitalism.org. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Nancy Pautsch, the Chief Evangelist of Stakeholder Value, which translates to President with ENVISION IT. She's an ever-evolving conscious leader and veteran in the technology industry. She led ENVISION's evolution as a conscious business and today continues to lead that thriving business. She's also active in the Conscious Capitalism Network, a founding member of our new Senior Leader Network, chairwoman of the advisory board for the Chicago chapter, and part of the leadership team with the Twin Cities chapter. She and ENVISION were even highlighted in the recently published book by Rosie Ward, Rehumanizing the Workplace, which highlights their care for their stakeholders. With that, I'd love to welcome and say, hi, Nancy.
Hi, Alexander. Thanks for having me. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm so excited for this conversation today. And I've got some questions to kick things off, but again, want to remind everyone, if you have any questions at any point, type them into the Q&A box. We're going to get through as many of them as we can today. And I want to start by just going to the basics of conscious capitalism and ask, when did you begin to consider yourself not just a capitalist, but a conscious capitalist?
Yeah, well, for me, I think it was kind of an evolution. I'd say about 10 to 11 years ago, I was a conscious business enthusiast. And then joining ENVISION IT to help architect the business to be a conscious business and lead it was in 2013. So I'd say then I became a practitioner of conscious business and then officially a conscious capitalist, I guess, at least with the language in 2016 when I was introduced to the movement by Raj Sisodia and got involved. And that's when, we really had the language and the tribe. It was like coming home to really become active in the movement. Yeah.
Well, actually, I want to build on that for a moment because you just pointed out that it seems like you were a conscious capitalist before you had the language for this. Mm-hmm. And so how did you come to believe in conscious capitalism principles before? Did you just always look at it that way? And then what was it like to get this language in 2016?
Yeah, well, so how did I come to conscious business? Firms of Endearment, that book was really my inspiration. That kind of was the intersecting point of a personal growth journey I was on and my career. So you had mentioned in the introduction that I'm a veteran in the technology industry, or an old dog, however you want to say it. But I grew up in the technology industry, which is traditionally rough and tumble. And especially our swim lane of technology is pretty sharp elbowed, actually. And that's how I grew up, and I didn't know any better, right? So when I had a point of lucidity and I launched onto this personal growth journey, I started to ask myself these big questions, right? My purpose, why am I here? And as I began to awaken, I started to, see the toxicity of the business that I was working in and leading but not owning, and kind of like a fish starting to recognize the water, right? And it really didn't feel right. I was kind of at this crossroads. I was doing all this self-work, inner work, outside of work. That was really became a side hustle, because when I dive in, I dive all in, right? And then I'd come into work, and it was just a really short-term focused, right? Shareholder at the expense of all else type business, especially the last kind of 3 years. And so anyway, so I was kind of really feeling conflicted. And then I had a big wake-up call, Alexander. And that wake-up call was when my business partner and dear friend, Bill Crane, developed Bell's palsy. And that was a direct textbook case from all the stress we were under. And that was kind of my dark night of the soul, right? Because he came into work and he was disfigured, and more importantly, he was in a lot of pain, I could tell. And yeah, that night was a reckoning for me. And that's what really kind of shook me. And I said, we got to get the heck out of here. It can't be this way. And then, as serendipity would have it, the book Forms of Endearment came into my sphere. And I read it, and I read it ravenously. Again, when I go all in, I mentioned I go all in, right? And I just read through it like you wouldn't believe. And I was so inspired. I immediately went to Bill and said, Bill, this is the answer. There's another way, right? There's another way. So I gave the book to him, and he read through it just as quickly and absorbed it just as enthusiastically as I did. And then, we're thinking, okay, how are we going to do this? We're going to start our own company. What are we going to do? Well, and serendipity again, or the universe, whatever folks believe, right? But something came in, and I was doing a favor for one of my team at the time, and I ended up meeting Bo Smithbeck, the brilliant, young, and kind-hearted founder of ENVISION. And we were set up he was doing a friend favor as well. And we were set up to talk about a project. Well, that went to the wayside. And I wanted to learn a little bit more about ENVISION IT. He wanted to learn a little bit more about Bill and me. And we did. And I gave him the book Forms of Endearment and said, listen, this is what we want to build. He said, that's what I want ENVISION IT to be. Come on and do it. So we joined Bo, and the three of us are the ELT and co-owners. And together we built a healthy, conscious business position for the long term. And we're quite the anomaly in our industry. But that was in 2013. And then I met Raj at an event in 2016. And that's when I was telling him about our initial success. We're starting to see the fruits of our labor after about 3 years. And he said, Nancy, please, you have to get involved in conscious capitalism, to which I said, what? And that was, I think, in May of 2016. Don't quote me. But then I went and found the Chicago chapter, because that was the closest. And that fall, I went to my first CEO summit. And needless to say, I am swimming in the Kool-Aid and loving it. So yeah. So what did it mean to have the language? I guess it was really first and foremost endorsing. But then more importantly, it was so wonderful. I mentioned tribe, community. It's so nice to meet, I don't want to say like-minded, but kind of like-valued folks, and folks that we could continue to learn from and share our story, especially lessons learned, bumps along the way. It was just so welcoming and heartwarming and lovely. Yeah.
That is an inspiring story, Nancy. Thank you. I want to dive more into parts of that, but I want to actually reflect on one thing that you just said, that getting the language was, I'm about to misuse the word, but I think reaffirming is what you said.
Yeah, because, we started with our purpose, And that's the first pillar of the framework. At least I consider it the first, right? I think it's considered the first, right? Is higher purpose and your why. And so when we got together at Envision, Bo, Bill, and me, we really landed on our higher purpose, which is to enrich the lives of our stakeholders. There are many reasons that we identified that as our why, our purpose, frankly, it's part of my life purpose. But for the business was one, all three of us just had an intrinsic and intuitive passion to care for people. And two, part of that, certainly Bill and mine, I'm going to say, was fueled by having so many years of not being treated, frankly, as humans. Really just being revenue generators and, wheels in the cog to, fulfill the profit maximization fallacy of the shareholders. And so we wanted to do the exact opposite, right? So then we had our higher purpose. And it happened to be to enrich the lives of our stakeholders. And so when you look at the four tenets, and then as far as conscious leaders, listen, I was already on that journey of the inner work, and Bill always was. Bill's always the sage and this, really grounded. Clearly, I'm a little different. We complement each other well. And Bo, for his youth, he was the most grounded, emotionally intelligent person I've seen at that age, right? So we were on that conscious leadership journey, and we supported each other in that, continuing to do that, right? And that, I think, is such a cornerstone for then a conscious culture, which we were so passionate about fostering and building. So then when I saw the four pillars, I'm like, this is the framework that we're kind of doing. This is awesome. So that's where I say it was endorsing that maybe we're doing something right, because we could feel it. And then the business results certainly came. But that's not why we went in. We went truly on a purpose to create meaningful work and then care for people that are inspired to actually participate in that. Yeah.
Okay, you touched on so much ground that I want us to cover, and I want to begin with the conscious leadership journeys that you talked about yourself and your other partners being on. Can you just tell us what conscious leadership has looked like for you or others in your career as you've seen it?
Yeah, sure. And thanks to Conscious Capitalism Inc., CC, I've met so many more and learned from them. And I'll tell you, that is my jam, right? Because I think everything kind of starts with ourselves, right? And so, the first thing I guess I'd say is many of us agree that, listen, everybody, let me say this. I think many folks might have a slightly different journey, right? People are on their own journey. But the broad strokes I've seen among most of the conscious leaders I've had the privilege of networking with, and certainly with Bo and Bill, are that we recognize that it's an ever evolving, we're lifelong learners, lifelong growers. Not me, I stopped at 410, different story. Joke. And then ever evolving. Right, ever evolving. So there's no checkbox, there's no finish line, right? This just continues on. But the other thing I guess I'd say is, for us, it's really working on self-awareness first, right? Let's not default react, let's mindfully respond and be aware of all that, right? Not all that, as much as you can, right? Emotionally intelligent, I know we all work on. And again, leaders that I have the privilege of knowing, I think the growth mindset. I think certainly authenticity is so huge, and that comes with the self-work, accepting yourself, right? And growing what you can, which also means fallible and imperfect. I'm a recovering perfectionist, people pleaser, and type A cubed. I mentioned the all in, right? And so, embracing the imperfection. And I always say now perfection is pure fiction, which helps me kind of know my triggers. And then I think, servant leadership is huge, right? And that's us. I mean, we just have such, I mentioned, a passion to care for others. I have the privilege of serving Envisioners and all our stakeholders, and I take that privilege really seriously. And then, one thing one thing I'll also mention, and this is with most of, not all, but many conscious leaders that I don't think folks talk about that much, but many that I know also have a spiritual component to it. There's a spiritual intelligence. Some people call it just intuition, right? Getting in touch with your intuition. There's different kind of spectrum. But certainly for me, and like I said, many, not all, but have that as well. So that's a little bit of a vomit for you on conscious leadership. But I think those are some commonalities I've seen among many, and certainly many that I work on. So yeah. Does that answer your question?
That is a great answer. I so appreciate how much ground you covered there and some keen insights for what conscious leadership really means there. I especially appreciate you talking about not just being reactive, but really thinking proactively about what to do and being intentional about it. And that's so key to conscious leadership.
Intentional. Thank you for that word.
Yes.
That's so important, right? Yeah.
So that's the leadership side of things. Let's talk about conscious culture. How would you describe what conscious culture is for a company, and what again you've seen it look like in your career when you've built up?
I'll say, and again, I'm so grateful. At ENVISION, the conscious culture is palpable. It's just heartwarming. You can see how envisioners care for each other and all of our stakeholders. And it's just heartwarming and inspiring, right? Envisioners inspire me every day. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's fuel for me. But so conscious culture, caring, trusting, and then I'm going to say fearless. And here's why. Because I think that fearlessness among each other, because we're so trusting of each other, that fearlessness, I think, really fuels innovation and creativity, because without judgment, no fear of judgment, I guess I'd say, right? So people can bring, crazy ideas, right? Wackadoodle ideas. We often call them SFDs, first drafts, ideas. And it might just seem completely wackadoodle, but we all know we can trust our envision family to say, hang on, let's take that like a piece of yarn and let's pull that a little bit, right? And collaborate to build on it together. And so, those are some things that I would mention. And then, I'd also say diversity. I think many conscious cultures are almost naturally diverse, because if we're going to innovate and be creative, we have to have people with different experiences, different backgrounds, that bring new ideas that haven't been in our purview yet. So I think that's kind of a natural, certainly DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion is just kind of, for us, a natural. And the other thing I'll mention about that is, I think certainly in our industry, the technology industry, if you're not being creative and you're not innovating, and doing so really, with a broader scope and empathy for things that you haven't experienced, you're not going to be very competitive, right? So that actually becomes an important differentiator for us, and competitive differentiator. But it came from just wanting to care for people. And then, when you care for people, what we've learned through our experiences, cared for people care for people. And it's absolutely beautiful. The last thing I'll mention that we really learned during the pandemic was resiliency as well. I think because of our conscious culture, I'll mention a story real quick. Because of our conscious culture, we were really resilient during the pandemic. And, we have open dialogue together all the time. And really mindful. I mentioned mindful communication. Great book, by the way, by Oren J. Sofer, Say What You Mean. Great book, especially for many technologists, us, we're called, we're geeks at heart, but purposeful geeks. And that's an FULL. But anyway, we also do surveys, and those are confidential surveys, right? So beyond just our open and authentic communication, we do anonymous surveys too, just if we're missing anything, right? And we did one at the beginning of 2020, in January 2020. And, it was great. We had 100% employee engagement. which I think speaks to our culture. But then in August of 2020, so what, 7 months into the pandemic, we did a survey again to kind of see how we're doing. How are we supporting everyone, today at this time? Because it's different for everyone at different times, right? And we added a question to that, and we asked everyone how they felt about our culture. Just 3 answers: is it sustaining? Is it improving? Or is it declining? Right? Is it deteriorating, our culture itself? 74% of envisioners said it's certainly sustaining, and 26% said it's improving. And that just shocked the heck out of us. But really was wonderful, because we saw everyone rally with each other. Moving to all virtual, people had to be more mindful, extra sensitive, ask 2-3 questions deep, not just the flippant answer, right? But really get into it for us to effectively communicate and support each other like we did. So I don't know, does that answer your question about culture? And by the way, those broad strokes on culture I really see on many conscious cultures. So
that is such a good answer. And I actually want to bring up a conversation we were having before this, because one question we talked about potentially asking is, what are some best practices or habits of companies to develop conscious cultures? And you had a really interesting take on this. And so I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share that, because there are people listening to this who are probably wondering, okay, how do I replicate that? How do I get to that 100% employee engagement?
yeah, well, I don't know that there's a perfect recipe. And I will say we're constantly evolving on how we help to foster that, because there isn't a recipe. It's not like, okay, now you're going to have a conscious culture, and we see with other companies, especially those are not on the conscious business track, kind of doing, we call them random acts of culture. Oh, we have a kegerator, we're conscious. No, so a couple things. First, I mentioned we have really an open dialogue, right? And we really ask folks, what matters to them, right? Again, not checking boxes. Oh, this looks like a good benefit, let's do it, right? No, really what matters to them, because what we want to support is long-term joy and fulfillment, not circumstantial happiness, right? We want to help contribute to a whole life of envisioners. So that dialogue is really important. For example, so these are just examples. I could go on and on, but here's 2 quick examples. At one point we learned that a lot of people at Envision were pregnant. Oh my gosh. I mean, we just had a lot of people that were going to have babies. And so needless to say, I stayed away from the water because something was in the water. But, and, we asked, individually, what's important to you with this big life event? And they said, taking care of their children and, saving up for their college, et cetera. So that year we started a benefit that we would seed all the college funds for envisioners born into the company, because that's what the biggest concern was, right? And then the very few people that weren't having babies that year, everybody has pets, everyone. And many folks have multiple pets, right? So we subsidize pet insurance to take care of our fur babies too. But those are just on the benefit side, more on the, and I could go on about that, but what we look at is what's important for people for a whole life, right? And that's where we choose to subsidize, yoga, mindfulness, all of those things. Of course, everyone can have a therapist. I mean, these things, right? But then, as we work on our conscious leadership journey, we share all the resources that we do with everyone, right? So what books, what podcasts, what workshops. In Chicago, the Conscious Capitalism chapter in Chicago is such a great chapter and so rich in content. And Twin Cities is too, but Chicago's been around a little bit longer. And they offer a course called CC 101. And we offer that up to envisioners to take that, which is awesome. Of course, the Conscious Capitalism conferences folks can go to. And then all of the Conscious Capitalism content, there's just so much, right? From the national organization, from the chapters. And so we encourage, it's all optional, of course. We do volunteer work often together. I'll tell you, when you work side by side, like Habitat for Humanity, and you're working together, giving back, we do Meals on Wheels. These are some things, all optional. Again, none of this is forced. There's no force culture, right? But when you're working as a team giving back, oh my God, that's optional. That's really incredibly bonding. But yeah, we have a whole library of books, videos, book clubs, yeah. just all sorts of stuff. And what we do is we experiment, what works. We're actually defining our conscious onboarding process as we speak. And we also have a conscious offboarding. And luckily we don't have to do those that often, right? Or it doesn't, that's one of the most difficult, heart-wrenching experiences for all involved. And we've actually partnered, shout out to 1111 Partners, the CEO, Samir Wagle, and an awesome conscious leader. And they help make that experience just, tolerable, better for everyone, as best as it can be. And so we have a conscious offboarding. So those are some of the things, but what we find is we experiment, we sprinkle tips and sips, I will say, we do that, which is a virtual get together every week. And we share tips on, okay, working from home, or they might be technology tips. They might be parenting tips. They might be, games. It's, but we call it tips and sips. And that is kind of our water cooler. And boy, is that interesting. We learned, people really miss each other. I'll tell you one other quick thing. In one of the surveys we sent out another one in January 2021, as we're looking to 21 as far as office space, as far as all sorts of things. And we said, we asked everybody, what is the one thing missing from your home office? Right? If there's one thing, what is it? Just left it blank. Well, about half the people responded. Otherwise, people said nothing. We've taken care of them. Everything's good. But the folks that did respond, the common thing that they all said was other envisioners. Other envisioners was missing for their home office. So that's when we knew, yeah. So we have some care packages going out that will touch on that. So anyway, yeah. So those are some of the things we do. But I just say experiment, and I learn from other conscious capitalists, right? What's meaningful, because it's meaningful, right? Again, it's not to look good. It's what matters to your family. So
I love how, even though there's no single recipe for success here, you just gave so many good ideas for people listening for how to work on their cultures.
Oh, well, good. That's nice to hear.
So the last pillar that we haven't talked about yet is stakeholder orientation. So how have you experienced that at Envision and throughout your career?
Well, Alexander, that's our jam, right? Because that's our mission. So this is where I get really passionate. So I'm going to try to tone it down a little bit here. But that's our mission. And part of that is, I mentioned, so many years of that not being it, we wanted to do the opposite. So I tell you, when we landed on that and decided that was our purpose, our higher purpose, our noble purpose, what we did, because Bill and I had so much industry experience, right? But again, we knew what we knew. So what we did was we really deconstructed. We looked at our previous life, right? Professional life. And we, the short-term, shareholder only, M&A's constant, which kind of fuels that shareholder only and short-term perspective, and puts a lot of pressure on everybody in the company, right? Remaining before a sale or remaining after a sale. And we deconstructed and analyzed all the, manufactured carrots and sticks that were intended to manipulate behavior, right? And there were lots of them. And I gotta tell you, it was kind of cathartic. It was hard and difficult because it triggered a lot of suffering, but it was really important. And we scrapped all of them. And we said, what if we just focused on the people and simplified everything? Clean slate, wrote new rules, which there aren't any really, to be frank, and did everything around starting with envisioners. And I mentioned, if we start there, caring for people, let's see how we grow and evolve and what happens, right? And what we learned, Alexander, and you can tell I'm getting revved up because I love this, is what we learned. I mentioned cared for people, care for people. And what we learned was the beautiful interdependence among thriving employees, thriving envisioners, and stakeholder success. So when I say thriving, I meant supporting, I mentioned earlier, supporting a whole life. What we've learned is that, employee engagement, right? Great and important, but that plus well-being equals thriving. And when envisioners are thriving, they're working from their zone of genius. Thank you, Gay Hendricks, a nod to him with that term. But when folks are in their zone of genius, right? They're loving their work and they're doing their best work. They're thriving in their best work. And I'll tell you, when folks do that, they have a pretty great day at work, right? It's an awesome day at work. Then when they leave work, they're their better selves when they see their family. They, God willing, can go to a PTA meeting again or a sporting event. They're their better selves out in society, and we've helped contribute to that great day. Not only that, though, it's reciprocal, right? Because if they're doing their best work, wow, they're doing their best work for our clients. And our clients are really happy because they're getting such quality work. And there's all sorts of studies of engaged employees and productivity, right? But when you're thriving, people that are thriving, it's quality, it's productivity, it's all of that. So our clients are really happy because they're getting this great output, right? Which then happy clients talk to other companies, right? And spread the love. That leads to business development. And that's a beautiful thing. That also leads to reputation, right? And we're engineered. We are operationalized for the long term. We're not short term. We're going to do this for forever, right? We have no end game. We just want to continue to do this and evolve and grow and have meaningful work for people and provide great service and, give back with our communities, be meaningful contributors, I guess, with our community. So anyway, the other thing I'll mention with folks that are thriving is, then they talk with their trusted friends and family about their work. And that helps support a really healthy hiring pipeline, right? Because envisioners will just trust people. They care so much about their quality of work. They care, right? They only want to bring people in that they trust to, have that quality. And then, so all of that. So the interdependence, right? We looked at kind of the interdependence of the manufactured carrots and sticks, and how that hurt reputation, hurt personal brand, hurt quality, hurt culture, everything. And we just turned it on its head. And we didn't have the answers at first, but we said, well, let's just start with caring for people, and the rest came. And I'll mention real quick from a business results, because many business leaders like to hear KPIs. So I'll just touch on those real quick. I mentioned 100% employee engagement, right? I mentioned our resilient culture, especially during COVID, actually having a quarter of folks thinking it was improving. And I'll also mention our customer sat is 97.7% awesome. Now, after every engagement with clients, we send out just a one question survey. It's real quick. And first of all, most clients actually respond with it. They actually complete it, which is great. But we asked, did we do awesome, good, or bad? And we have 97.7% awesome, which is great. The last thing I'll mention is, when I met with Raj, so 2013, we really had ENVISION IT, joined ENVISION IT and got it on the track of conscious business, right? Seeing Raj in 2016, when I was telling him about some of our early results, I think it was that year, we weren't in the running, we didn't put ourselves in it, but we were awarded from our local communities for our contributions to the economy and the local community. So that was kind of our first award. And then 2017, 18, 19, and 20, we were recognized in our industry globally, nationally and globally, separately, nationally and globally, for engineering excellence, project delivery, and customer sat. So, those are some business metrics that have come from, again, starting with caring for people, and cared for people, care for people. And that includes all stakeholders, which is the business. The business is, we're positioned healthily for the long term. So yeah, does that answer your question with regards to stakeholders? Probably a little longer than you wanted, Alexander, but again, that's kind of my.
That was such a good answer, as each of them have been, Nancy. I'm just so appreciating you taking the time to be with us and share all of your insights. And want to turn over to Q&A with the audience soon. But before we do that, and as a reminder to everyone, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A box. What is the one thing that you hope people listening to this really take away from today? If it's just one thing, what would you want people listening to take away?
There's a better way. Be inspired. It works. I mean, start with people, care for them, endear them, enrich them. And it will come, right? Now, that doesn't mean you need a sound business strategy. Come on. It's not all daffodils, rainbows, and unicorns, for crying out loud, especially in our industry, right? You need a sound and well-founded and structured business strategy. Absolutely. And you got to work hard. What is it? Roy Spence, he has said in the conscious capitalism community, purpose doesn't make things, makes things clearer, not easier. And that's true, but it's possible. My point is, it's possible. Read Firms of Endearment, great inspiration. And I'll tell you, it's just, for us, it's what you mentioned, us being profiled and rehumanizing the workplace. It was just kind of interesting because I think I read Firms of Endearment in like 2010, 2011, don't quote me. And, here, 8, 9, 10 years later, our company is profiled in rehumanizing the workplace. And so we said, this is what we want to build. And there it is. So I guess understand that the possibilities are limitless. They're limitless. Act from the heart and leverage experience and the community. And then I would say get involved, because there are people that will help, and rising tides raise all ships. Alexander, you asked for one thing, and I think I just gave you a dozen. Sorry. I talked fast though. Did that help? Was that okay?
And there's so much for everyone to take away from this. So thank you, Nancy. And let's turn it over to questions from people who are listening in. I want to start with Caro, who thanks you for sharing your story. Your passion can be felt. And is wondering, in your path to become a conscious business, what kind of support did you have in order to bring all of these ideas into action?
That's a great question, and thank you for it. Early on, it was really us and kind of undoing everything we learned. It was really trying to do the opposite. And we hadn't found the conscious capitalism community yet, right? So our support were really, the personal growth journey I was on, I mentioned, it became a side hustle. I mentioned I go all in. Well, so I was reading all about conscious business, and as well as continuing that self-work. So, it was really just a lot of the research. I contributed a whole bunch of book titles and resources to Abby, who is a great tremendous member of the Conscious Capitalism Inc. team. And I know she's publishing those. So I would encourage, is it Caro? Did I say that correctly? To look there for, I think I provide, 25, 30, and I'm sure everybody else will. So I would go there. But early on, I will say it was just self-researching. And then I can't tell you how it was like an explosion of love, finding the conscious capitalism community. And I really want to thank Raj for strongly encouraging me to get involved, because he was right. Yeah. So.
I so appreciate that, and want to go next to Chris's question. Spiritual intelligence is one of the 4 conscious intelligences, and you mentioned that in your answer about conscious leadership. Could you say more about what this is beyond intuition, or is there a need for further language to describe this?
I think there is a need for further language, because it might be different for everyone, right? It's a little bit of a hot topic, and but I mentioned a book I read early on. Oh my gosh, I want to make sure I have it right, but perfection is pure fiction, Nancy, is Spiritual Intelligence by, I think, Cindy Wigglesworth. Yes, I think it's Cindy Wigglesworth, and I've done a workshop or 2 with her. So I would explore that, because that's an entire book on spiritual intelligence. But yes, I think spiritual intelligence was certainly referenced in John Mackey, Carter Phillips, and Steve McIntosh's book, Conscious Leadership. So I think it's great that it's being talked about more. And I will mention this on our recent, I am so fortunate, again, grateful and privileged to be part of a Conscious Capitalism Inc. mastermind group. And actually, in one of our mastermind groups, we did an entire session on spiritual intelligence and kind of our respective journeys. And boy, was that fulfilling. I mean, that was just great. So I think find people that are willing to talk and share, and do some continued reading. Again, Spiritual Intelligence, the book was great. It's now a long time ago that I read it. I should reread it. But it's nice to see that more people are getting more comfortable talking about that. And yeah, there is language, and we should foster it. again, with people that are comfortable, because and people that may be on different spectrums in that comfort. Again, we often, sometimes you have to get beyond what's comfortable to grow. I always think of, Rosebud, right? And when we work out our muscles, it's got to hurt a little bit, but then you grow a little bit. So hopefully people, are open-minded. I'm reading the book right now, Think Again by Adam Grant, which is kind of really interesting to undo, a lot of those grooves and be open. So I hope that answers Chris's, at least offers some feedback and perspective for Chris's question.
And I think you're absolutely right. There's some language around spiritual intelligence already, but there's more to be developed, especially deepening the concept. So I want to go next to Amy, who asked, how did you communicate your values to your customers, and how did they react when you rolled this out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy, and thank you. And, to many, we didn't, because, and that brings up a really good point. To many, we didn't proactively communicate it. And because many of them don't care. I have to be frank, not all businesses are on the conscious business path. But they do care about quality work, right? They do care. They almost all discuss the experience in working with us and how different it is. They kind of, it's like a, I don't want to say cold splash water, because I don't know that that's pleasant, but it's the experience is very unique, and folks come back. And again, the quality is so is always commented on, and the care. They feel envisioners care, which again, in our industry, traditionally is just not at all there. Not to paint a really grim picture, but anyway, what was I going to mention on that? Oh, and that's what I was going to mention. Our business development folks, their titles are stakeholder value seekers. And well, on the sales side, our marketing, the head of our marketing is cultivator of connection. So we all have titles actually that the employee and a group kind of come up with together, like what they actually do and then what's meaningful, and then to actually say it. But seekers, also as salespeople, one of the things that is really important to them is qualifying our clients, right? And what's interesting is, meaning, let's work with people that care about our care, right? And not just folks that aren't that are rough and tumble, right? And what's interesting is the seekers that we are privileged to have with us, they take that really seriously, because they don't want to put any other envisioner, one of our professional service, one of our consultants, our endearment team, which is our help desk, or our developers, they don't want to put any of their peers into a client environment that's toxic. Right. So it's really interesting. Our qualification process, we take incredibly serious. And that's really out of care for each other, which for me is really heartwarming. But, the other thing with that is when you work with a really good client and they kind of get it, and you don't have to verbalize it, you just do good work, right? They get it through the experience. And then oftentimes they'll ask. Oftentimes they will ask, and they'll learn later. And they're like, oh, that might be why. And then actually they might be more interested in conscious business, but we don't advertise that as far as go out and tell people about it, for our clients anyway. I'll certainly talk about conscious capitalism and conscious business till obviously I'm blue in the booth, because I love it, but not as a business development tool, I guess, if that makes sense. It becomes one later, because again, people just want more of it. They're like, wow, that felt kind of great. Let's do more. And our customer loyalty is fierce, and we're blessed. And that keeps us, it compels us to continue to grow, learn, evolve, and continue to do even better work. So it's, again, that's part of that independence and that beauty that comes from all of it. I hope that answers Amy's question to some degree.
I think that's great. We've got a comment from someone else in response to that, Yvonne, saying, yes, she doesn't know that they talk about conscious capitalism to all their clients, but they demonstrate it through their work and their interactions with all of their stakeholders. And that's how it comes through.
And that's, I'll tell you, it's so interesting. I just got chills, Yvonne. Thank you. Which is great for a woman of my vintage. Anyway, that's what we say is let's walk the talk. right? Let's walk the talk and show and exemplify. People say, well, how do you know if you're working with a conscious business? And our answer is, you just kind of know, right? You feel it and you know it. And again, kind of the check boxes are, it's not to look at, it's to be good and be good for others. So Yvonne, I can't tell you how that lands with me because yeah, thank you. Chills still. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Yvonne. You've made my day.
And we're already a couple of minutes over, and I want to respect your time. So I think it's a great place for us to end. Just want to say, Nancy, thank you so much for all that you're doing as a conscious capitalist and sharing your story and your wisdom with everyone here. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, and to the entire CCI team. The entire team is just doing such tremendous work. And so thank you for all that you guys are doing. We're blessed with you. So thank you.